Good. Nā mai haere mai. To celebrate the University of Canterbury's 150th anniversary, the Department of History is welcoming back and honouring the diversity of our graduates from across the decades. Ko Katie Pickles tōku ingoa, and I'm going to ask our guests about their memories of their time as a student, discuss their life since graduating and how history's proved useful, and seek advice for those studying history today and into the future. Tonight, our guest is Dick Edmundson. Dick is a secondary school principal working in schools for them to be desirable places for all to learn and work. Reconnecting school and community, he's currently in his 8th year, and I think it will be his last year, as principal of Ōhautahi Christchurch's Te Aratai College, which was formerly called Linwood College. Emphasising whanaungatanga, close connections between people, learning focused relationships with students, whānau, staff and the wider community from social agencies to businesses defines his practice as a school leader. Now, his long career so far includes principal of Hornby High School for 7 years and assistant principal at Aranui High School. Dick has worked as a secondary program leader at the New Zealand Graduate School of Education, so he's taught many of our teachers, and he's also taught previously at Fielding Agricultural High School, various Wellington schools, Kaiapoi High School, and also overseas. So welcome back to History, Dick. It's a great pleasure to have you here tonight and be welcoming you back. And you have your Bachelor of Arts in History from the University of Canterbury and an MA Honours also in History from the University of Canterbury. So definitely one of our history graduates and one who's gone on to have a very illustrious and interesting career in teaching. And as we've been saying, over the years, on average, half of our history graduates teach. So it's the most popular and wondrous thing for history graduates to do. And I often think that's because history is the heart of the humanities. Jeff Rice always says that, our colleague. And there's something about teaching that is warm, that to do it, you have to like people, isn't it? And you have to like attempting to improve people, to improve the world, isn't it? You have to enjoy the idea of education and so forth. So anyhow, we'd like to ask you about your time here for a start. So you're actually a local. Couldn't get much more local.
I am. Kia ora, Katie. Kia ora koutou te loa, but yes, I was born in Ilam Road, and my parents bought that house before the university came out to Ilam, and Ilam Road at that stage was one car width's worth of tar seal with cattle farms and dairy and sheep either side, quite a lot of it. So, yep, completely local.
Yeah, it is. And you went to Ilam Primary School?
I did.
Just
Ilam
along the road?
Yeah, Ilam Primary, and I watched the university being built, and I rode my Rally 20 bicycle up and down the hills of all the construction dirt there and watched it come up. In fact, I can remember the moving straight into something quite major, being at Ilam. I think I'm about 6 or 7, and realizing for the first time that not everyone went to university. So this is showing what a lucky, and I think the right word is to say privileged childhood that I had, that so many of my adult role models had a tertiary education, and then of course going to primary school and seeing over the fence a university just reinforced to me
Yes.
that it was there. And,
yes.
It was a natural thing to do.
Yes, yeah, it was right in your environment, complete local. And of course, your mum is Joyce Edmundson, who has a degree in English from the university, and I had the privilege of working with on the first book that we did. She's an old girl, of course, of Bishop Julius Hall downtown, and very talented, managed to put together a book all about the old girls. That is a very difficult thing to do. I don't think any
Yes,
schools have managed to do it since.
we called, the family called that book That Damned Book, actually. And it was an absolute joy for both my parents to be putting that together. And everyone was delighted when it was launched and finished.
It was, and Dame Phyllis Guffart launched it. She's recently passed on. Just thinking of her, it was quite a fantastic launch. But yes, your dad Joe was very involved as well in the project. Yeah, and your mum and dad met at, you were telling me, at the university too.
They did,
the downtown site.
Yep,
Yeah,
they certainly did. They met at a student dance, which they said was called a student hop. That was the slang of the time then.
The student hop. So no, it's quite fantastic. So they're living in Ireland, and the university came out to you, and you watched it emerge and turn into the campus that it is. But yeah, but always with that sort of awareness, like you say. And your master's was your thesis was supervised by Mari Peters.
It was, so that was a good time, and I did some English papers as well, and I greatly enjoyed the breadth that, as you moved further into academic study, the breadth that came up with. Yes. And I took a year off between my BA and my MA, and boy, do I wish I'd taken time off between school and my BA, actually. But there's only one person in my group of friends who did that, and that was considered to be very unusual. Now, of course, the gap year and making sure that we are ready, both financially and socially, to go to tertiary is much more common.
Yes, it is. So that's good advice, that for people to really consider that. And there are lots more opportunities these days, teaching opportunities often on summer camps and so forth to do in years off. And so that was great. So you had that gap year, and what did you do during your gap year?
I was working through my undergraduate and gap year in the liquor industry. So Russley Hotel, which is now an old folks' home, the Bush Inn, the Animal Bar it was called, which became the Cobb & Co, and then the Bush Inn Courts and Dalgety Wine and Spirits, and then Hornby Liquorland as well. So that was a good insight into the range of human beings that there is. Yes. And if I had any form of sheltered childhood, that certainly helped expose more.
Sort of a parallel education.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it would be quite and eye-opening, and seeing people at their worst quite often.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And misbehaving. Sort of makes most school behavior probably seem mild in comparison. Oh, that's really interesting. When did it sort of emerge to you, your calling, that you wanted to be a teacher?
During that master's year, when I realized that, because what teaching gives us, there is no other profession in which you can be teaching or interacting with young people, first of all. And then you've got your academic subject, you're taking your sports, you're getting involved in cultural activities all the way through. So, just fantastic to be able to do that.
Yes, so it sort of brought together a whole lot of your values and passion, enthusiasms and everything, into that. That's really good. So once you were a teacher, where was your first job?
So my first job was fielding ag, which I was very pleased to get out of Christchurch. Now, I'm just going to have to say something. I'm at home, and I think someone's just arrived at the front door. So I'm just going to have to whip out there and come back. Okay.
Excellent.
So just sorry,
Excellent.
Katie. Yep.
No, it's all good. So I'll keep us going. Hopefully Dick will be back soon. So his first job was at Fielding High School, and he taught there for a long time, as we can say. And then he's still at the front door. Hopefully all is well, and he shall return soon. Good opportunity to grab a cup of tea or coffee. Aha.
There I'm back. So
Excellent.
yeah, my wife's out playing bridge, so it's just me and the two cats at the moment.
Excellent. And all is well.
Yep.
Good.
Now,
So we got, it's great. So we had you at Fielding High School.
Oh yeah, yep.
Yes.
Yep.
In your career. And then so what should we move on to sort of some of the highlights of your career? What is it that you think had some of those moments? What is it that you really enjoy most when you look back?
It's seeing kids, adolescents, teenagers who didn't believe that they had the capability to achieve, realizing that not only did they, but underneath that, they deserve to achieve. So there's a whole socio-cultural construct of who they are and deserving to be a learner and then being a learner.
Yes.
And it becomes, over the last probably 10 years, it's become more nuanced with that too, looking at what is success for the individual and how does that success fit in with the values of their community. Because learning, I think this is right, I'll say it and we'll see whether it's right. Learning is a personal activity. I suppose there is such a thing as a social and collective learning, but we learn in our own selves. And certainly when we are being capped and getting academic honours, that happens to us. You know, yes. the cap is put on us. And we know that for many communities, the pushing of oneself forward is not the way that it's not the accolade. If we are doing things, we are doing it for the benefit of others and how we see ourselves in that wider collective.
Yes.
So it's been looking at precisely how and New Zealand society is getting better at this, and sometimes we actually do it really quite well, and then other times not. But there is much more dialogue in schools now about how we can be a bicultural nation in a global society, and we have multicultural society and a bicultural nation, and bringing those two things together. And I find that fascinating. It's intellectually fascinating and really morally important for education and the health and wealth of our little country too, because we're a trading nation. So we do have to know how to engage with the diversity and the whole geopolitical realities out there as well.
Yes.
That's very cool. Yeah. That's very cool. Yeah. And teaching is, you've said, Katie, that many great history graduates become teaching. So that's just wonderful because, man, it's a tough job. But I cannot think of a more rewarding job. In fact, if I was going to do it all again, I would hope that I would end up teaching again too.
Oh, yeah, that's really good. No, that's great to hear, isn't it? Yeah, it's the sort of job that if you have the passion for it, it's just wonderful. When you're talking, it's sort of like that. It can be quite selfless, as opposed to selfish. That sort of selfish individual learning and self-actualizing, but perhaps it's about service and community, and it's about communities, isn't it? And
completely
that way. And that seems that's what a lot of historians are interested in, isn't it? It is like communities and nations and around and how individuals are within them, but it's always that sort of agency and structures together. So that's all really interesting. And I know a lot of your career has been spent in what are now called it's now the equity index that you've been involved in with, that used to be called the decile system, and we had a decile system, now we've got the equity index.
That's right.
So you've been working on the National Working Party for that.
Yeah.
Do you think it's gone well?
Katie, I do.
Good.
I do. So New Zealand's had a decile system, which was a system of how schools were categorised by socio and economic circumstances of the communities around them. Decile 1 to 10, 10 being the most affluent communities down to 1. And that was good for its time, but with the macro data that we now have access to and some quite uncomfortable thinking required, we're now able to, I don't want to say predict, but we certainly know factors that are more likely to lead to success and factors that lead to struggle and sometimes, well, often failure. I need to say that word, failure. And so the government has scrapped the decile system, which was, as I say, based on the census of the community around, which didn't actually mean necessarily the children who attended the school. And now we know through the integrated data index, so supercomputers all marrying their data and various factors which are then highlighted and then algorithms for that. We know who are the children who are most at risk. So this is quite a difficult topic to talk about. And those children are actually funded into the school. Now, the schools don't know who those children are because it's not predestination. Some people do have these factors and rise above them. And but the actual school funding for the equity index part is based on the actual kids in the school. And so our school got a considerable lift in funding this year, over 400,000. And that was good. In some ways, you wish that we didn't have that lift in funding because it means that we have a significant number of students who have a lot of challenges in their lives. And none of those challenges are caused by them, not a single one. And I'm also going to say many won't be caused by their whānau either. We're talking about socio-cultural conflicts. We're talking about post-1840 and all those decades of things that have happened to our country and in our country. And the Equity Index is a very honest and thoughtful way of creating a more even society and giving people the best chance. Yes. And that's not just about fairness. There's actually economic sense to this too. If I can continue into sort of one piece of dark data, New Zealand, I'm going by slight memory here, New Zealand has got the 7th highest imprisonment rate of a country in the OECD. Now, I find that absolutely outrageous that this very blessed country in terms of it's a benign climate and all these sorts of things. You know, we should be able to feed ourselves. We should be able to house ourselves, for goodness sake. We've got ourselves into a bit of a mess, and the prison stats is one example of that. And then within those prison stats, who are in prison is a complete other story, but I won't go into that anymore. So what I'm saying is that the power of education is not just a personal and a social good, but it is actually an economic good. We cannot afford to have, first of all, I think it's $110,000 to keep each prisoner in jail, for goodness sake. Now, sort of facile thinking is, wouldn't it be lovely to take half of that money and pour it into the under fives I'm a big believer in Nathan Wallace, the first 1,000 days. Front end load. That is slightly facile thinking, because unfortunately, there are bad people in the world, and we will always have to have prisons. But we don't need to have as many people in the prisons who are there for life circumstances. And the power of education is to ensure that people can step back, reflect, and make deliberate choices that are going to benefit them and their community, rather than being buffeted by societal forces.
Yes.
Excuse the rant, Casey.
No, that's interesting. And you're talking about prisons as institutions, and when we're thinking about schools, what always fascinates me about your approach to schools as a place is you don't treat them as an institution that is sort of locked away from the world and where children have to go to and can't leave. Like, tell us a bit more about the sort of the secrets of your success in your approaches to the schools that you're leading and have led.
You have to start with the individual, and then, of course, each individual then forms a collective, but certainly realizing that each student is loved by people, and sometimes their circumstances aren't ideal, but each student is on the same bell curve as every other sort of school. Let's just say school. If every school has the same range of students in there, it's just where the various quartiles, etc., may end up, and how squashed the bell curve may be in certain areas. But yeah, absolutely have to start with seeing the other person as the individual that they are, and then create a culture where it is expected that people will want to bring their best self to school, to bring their A game to school. And in order to do that, it's often the best way not to actually ironically focus on the individual, but focus on what the individual can do for their community. For instance, at our start of year mihi whakatau, I always say, and it's true, that there's somewhere in this group of year nines, at least one of you is going to be a millionaire. I say that, and then I say, "Is it you? Is it you?"
The hands up.
Yeah, is it both of you? And then we move from there to, why is it important for us to be economically, is the word ambitious? A word like that, perhaps, because it's what we can do with our money. We can then choose, if we wish to buy a Ferrari for every day of the week. Okay, we can. But we can also choose to use our money wisely for our family, whānau. We can choose to use it for pro-social things. And it gives us choices to be able, to live our lives in certain ways.
Yes.
So seeing the individual, creating hope, and creating practical steps. Schools often use the image of the potama, and it's a very good one to be using, because if we think of ourselves, 10, 20 years later, well, teenagers don't think like that. So you have to be able to scaffold each step along the way for them. Certainly starting with the end in mind and working backwards, starting with the big heart goal that children may have works, but then there have to be practical steps through it.
Yes. And you've obviously thought a lot about this and studied this, and I know you've worked with Angus McFarlane, who was here at Canterbury and Waikato before, and
gorgeous
really,
man.
yeah,
Gorgeous man.
And and just all of this really quite I think it is quite world-leading approaches. That's perhaps where Aotearoa New Zealand's leading the way and really trying to think, like you said before, about biculturalism within a multicultural nation and all of these attempts to, and I know you've really been a big part of that and really thinking about it. So thinking of our current history students and those who are likely thinking about a career in teaching, what advice would you have for them, please?
I completely go for it. It's a most, as I say, most wonderful profession. There is a vocational aspect to teaching, and I can't make up my mind whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But if you've got it, you can't get rid of it. So embrace it, And then there's the absolute practical aspects of teaching. Just has got so much variety to it. And let's just say that we are solely, we'll take what we're talking about, social studies and history. So we just got a one subject line, which most of us don't have for a start. So there's variety there. Let's just say we've got that. Then we've got the age range. So you're dealing with in secondary, and the school I'm in is a year 7 to 13 school. So it's dealing from with 11-year-olds, 10, 11-year-olds to 18-year-olds. So you've got that variety. Then you've got all the other things that we go to school for. You've got your range of sports and your range of cultural activities. So in a day, in a week, teaching just gives so much for us to do, which of course can be a trap. So very much in our first years of teaching, do get involved in things outside the classroom, but make sure we're not over-involved, because every lesson we take in our first year of teaching is the first time we've taken that lesson. And have the balance. Know how to say no, or know how to say love to, but I can't do it this year, but come back to you next year. Those sorts of things. Yes,
that's really good. And like we say, the age group, there are all the many different levels that you can teach at, and a degree equips you for all of them, really, doesn't it? It's some attracted to early childhood, primary, secondary. It's right across the range that way, and those skills. So, sort of thinking of those who are thinking of studying history today and into the future, what are the secondary schools sort of going to look at? Do you think that subjects are staying the same or just as important? What are some of the trends in our schools at the moment for learning?
The fundamental, we'll call them subjects or areas of study or whatever, they will stay the same, because knowledge and wisdom is absolutely eternal, and those things outlast educational fads. And a public health warning, education is full of fads. So we have to, I was about to say take some things with a grain of salt. I'm not saying that, but we do have to have a critical lens, and certainly know that we've all got X amount of time and energy. So let's make sure we're putting our time and energy into what's going to have the greatest gain. I think in terms of what's happening now in education and the future, the awareness that knowledge is, I don't think it is fixed. I've become, over the last 10 years, very interested in historiography and the whole epistemological understanding of our development. Whose knowledge, how knowledge, and how do we balance different world views?
Yes.
That's not to say that there isn't sometimes the right way. I don't believe in I don't have the vocab to describe it when there isn't one right answer. I think I'm contradicting what I said before. Certainly there are, because teachers are very pragmatic people, and if we're both pragmatic and idealistic, and you need both those things.
Yes.
When you've got 14-year-olds vaping in your toilets, you have to be pragmatic.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So we're down there, but we're learning very much that just because the book says that, or it's been handed down like that, it is okay to actually have a critical eye on that and say for ourselves, does that make sense to me? And in my environment, why is it like that? Why has this tradition been handed on? Why are classrooms physically the way they have been for decades and decades? And all those pragmatic things, as well as what is knowledge, comes into it.
Knowledge. And knowing yourself, knowing your values. I think that's something that you always emphasize, and everybody really having that self-awareness of what they do stand for.
Yeah, I think in teaching, you very much are going to be found out if you haven't got a healthy sense of self. If we try and pretend to be something that we're not, the kids will absolutely find us out. I heard a colleague say a really interesting story about the kids had said to her, Miss, you always wear really interesting clothes. Not our sort of clothes, of course, but we like the fact that you wear interesting clothes.
Yeah. An authentic character.
Yeah, and they were also saying, I think they were saying, that we respect that you respect us enough that you want to dress in interesting clothes. You see us as worthy of making an effort for.
Yes. Yes, and sharing, who she is and what she stands for, and the personality and the character, isn't it? Yeah, not being taught by a robot or being taught online with multi-choice or something. That's that human experience.
Well, we've certainly, we've learned a lot through COVID with online learning. I don't actually think we needed to learn that because we could have predicted that, and obviously the online learning was necessary.
Yes.
Though there are some people I have listened to recently whose opinions I trust have said that maybe the cost of online learning has been far higher than we predicted it would be. We always knew there would be a cost, the lack of face-to-face, but maybe it's a higher cost than we perhaps have been prepared to admit. So that will be interesting to see what comes out.
Yeah, very uneven and mixed impact. Yeah, definitely. And of course, in Canterbury, we're sort of the post-mosque terror attack as well. I mean, you were very close by to that when it happened at Linwood.
Yes, so the again, going into a very difficult topic, the school is only down the road from where the Linwood Mosque was, and
yes, that's just all with on a sort of a dark. That's the thing with teaching, isn't it? In schools and community, there are really good times, but it's also very tough and challenging. And like we're talking about COVID, and of course the earthquakes as well that Canterbury's been through, and the impacts on schooling there. And do you think perhaps how has that led to some good as well?
It absolutely has, and it's a delightful thing to be able to say that before the earthquakes, Christchurch, like every other centre in New Zealand, had a very competitive educational sector. Nuts. Schools advertising to get students coming to them. I just think that is very crazy. And there was poaching of students from one community to another. There is another way of looking at this, of course, which is that parents have the right to be able to send their children to the flavour of school that most matches their value set. And that is real, but there is a greater truth than that one, which is when schools do start taking kids from other communities, that is deeply damaging to the community where the child comes from. I had another colleague who said that is called asset stripping communities. I thought, whoa, that is a good term. I'm going to remember that term. But post-earthquake, the Greater Christchurch principals and board chairs literally got together in the same room and said, there has to be a better way of doing this. So a voluntary memorandum of understanding was signed, which was basically, we will reduce out-of-zone involvement. And that has been successful. Auckland and Wellington principals nearly fell off their chairs when they found it was actually going to stick, but it has. Unfortunately, of course, it literally took the ground to move, an earthquake, to get it to happen.
Yes, shook it all up, and that sort of led to that. So, one of the changes, it's perhaps positive, and since, and sort of. Lastly, before we go, I'm thinking we started mentioning before about discipline, and I know you deal on a daily basis with lots of challenging behaviour, to put it mildly. You mentioned vaping and so forth going on. So, what are some of your secrets of sort of positive behaviour for the teachers who are listening and might be after a few tips?
Well, usually when one meets the family, things start to fall into place. And my most challenging conversations as principal are actually with family, and how terribly sometimes parents and other caregivers can behave. And again, that's not necessarily their fault, because they are who they are for all sorts of reasons. But in terms of, again, the pragmatics of things, we have to find a bridge to make the family become a positive influence in whatever we're trying to solve with the child. Teachers basically can't lose their temper. We do, we're human, but we put it down as an error. As soon as we lose our temper, we lose our ability to engage ourselves in any intelligent debate, to notice, to have nuanced conversations. There is a wonderful phrase which many teachers will know already. We as teachers must respond, not react. We have to have our intelligence on. And that can be hard when a child is swearing at us. There is no doubt that the role of the teacher is being unofficially redefined, whereas it is in most schools, I don't have data on this, but I'm assuming it's going to be over 50% of schools, it will be expected that teachers will get sworn at as part of their career. And the child will not be thrown out of that school for it. Now, I've no idea what the full solution for that is, but I certainly know that concepts like beautiful concepts like culturally responsive and relational pedagogy and trauma-informed practice and many other ways of which we as teachers can present ourselves and connect with kids, they are far more likely to reduce the likelihood of negative reactions. Certainly, as teachers listening will know, if we want to rack up some kids, it's very easy to do it.
So it's that respond, don't react.
And anyone who's studied psychology, which I haven't, that's one of my regrets. Now, all behavior is telling us something. The behavior is just the signal of something else.
Yeah. And you step back and thinking, where's that coming from?
Even though sometimes we want to leap over the table and whack them one, but that's not a good way to do it.
Not a good way. And I'm sure you spend your share of time breaking up the fights, isn't it? Oh, yes. Dick, it's been a real honour for us to bring you home and bring you home to your home turf as it is. And but really, you've been around the world, you've been around the country, and you've been in many different schools doing all sorts of excellent work over the years and training up our teachers. And so it's really good. We're very proud of you and all that you have done so far. And we appreciate all of your teaching and many of our graduates you've taught as well, and we know that teaching can be very challenging and unpredictable, and but it really has that draw card, doesn't it, that really draws us into it, and those of us sort of seeking human improvement and knowledge and in history, the history background, and of course other subjects like we're saying as well. But for historians, teaching is just such an important and valuable career. And such a noble and worthy thing to do, I think, even if it has those challenging times. So thank you very much for all of your time and all of your wisdom, and for letting us bring you home and honour you, and for all you do. And go well, and ka kite. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Casey. Yeah, I enjoyed myself immensely. Good.
Wonderful. Lovely to have you as our guest. Ka kite.
Thank you.